Chapter 3. Soon after Moshi had received the secret letter from the imperial capital, the news that Gu Meng was about to return to the city was finally announced to the public by the Emperor of Changhua, together with the method of punishment. He would be handed over to Wang Shijun, who would be given full control. The news quickly spread throughout Changhua country, and although Moshi's army was located far away at the northern frontier, they also learned of this by the third day after the announcement. Excitement boiled over at the northern frontier army. On the outside, they remained impassive and silent as ever, but as soon as they rotated off duty, almost everyone could be seen discussing this topic animatedly. Moshi observed them, but for once, did not control the chatter. He felt that it was perfectly understandable for them to be so high-strung too, because the previous commander of the Northern Frontier Army was none other than the one who swept away everything in his path, the invincible general of the Gu family. A great majority of the soldiers in the army had once been willing to follow Gu Meng to their graves. They were undoubtedly loyal to the end, but a long time ago, they had also sincerely given their allegiance to their general-in-chief Gu Meng, despite the fact that the troop title he had assigned to them was Wangba Army 4. This wasn't a joke, but absolutely serious. Before Moshi had taken over, the personnel records of this division of the army used to go down as such: Liu Dishuang, soldier of the Wangba Army; Zhang Dayan, squad leader of the Wangba Army, and so on, and so forth. At the head of it all was Gu Meng, general-in-chief of the Wangba Army. According to reason, there should be no one who would want to enter a division with such a vulgar name. Yet that couldn't be farther from the truth. At that time, Gu Meng was the most outstanding and illustrious high-ranking officer in Changhua. A majority of the famous generals either had handicaps, were bound by obligations, or would act arrogant. But Gu Meng was different. He was born as a slave, with no parents, no care in the world, no skin on his face, and no fear of death. If all the chief generals of Changhua were to take off their clothes and stood in a row, Gu Meng may not necessarily have been the most robust out of them, but he would most definitely be the guy with the most scars. He was fully deserving of the title of Changhua Empire's Beast of the Altar. Gu Meng's assistant at the time would always look at his injuries and criticize him. As a chief general, why on earth would you always rush ahead of everyone? Do you not even know of the concept of hiding yourself? Gu Meng would just laugh it off. His face was one that didn't belong to the battlefield. It was very gentle, and his handsomeness carried an air of childish naivety behind it. When people looked at that face, all that would come to mind would be the image of a little flower blooming on the plains after the first fall of rain, and not bloodshed or death. After that, this charmingly sweet man would blink his black eyes, slightly purse his soft lips, and in a voice possessing the texture of satin, he would coax his angered friend in jest. These long legs of mine cause me to run fast. I was forced by nature, I tell you, forced. As long as he was on the battlefield, it would seem as if it wasn't all just the freezing cold and bloodshed, but also laughter as sweet as nectar. He would remember every single one of his comrades' day of birth, and during peacetime, he would often bring the cultivators the army worked closely with to small villages to drink and be merry, even when occasionally coming across crafty local villagers who would charge sky-high prices. Gu Meng wouldn't get angry. He would just smile and throw down all of his money pouches onto the table to exchange for meat and wine for his men. At the end of the night, he would then shout in a loud voice, "Eat well and drink well. Tonight, Daddy 7 wants to see you all expand your bellies and fill it up. All of you are my precious darlings. If we run out of funds, Daddy will find something else to exchange for you." Gu Meng was a man of his word, and one time, he stripped off all of his own military robes and armor, flung them at the liquor counter, and traded them for some white pear blossom wine. The rowdy soldiers then howled with laughter, saying, "General Gu, we still want to eat beef. Do you have anything else you can strip off?" At that time, he was down to only his snowy white inner robe, but yet he laughed and pointed towards them. "Give me a minute." "No way, General Gu. You're not really going to pawn off your underpants, right? It's not even worth much money." Gu Meng had no intention of pawning his underpants, though really did have nothing left of value on him. Under everyone's surprised and amused gazes, he walked over to the wine-selling widow who was laughing heartily, and kissed her on the cheek. As soldiers turned deafeningly silent, and the charming widow was also stunned by his actions, the wine ladle in her hand, dripping wine onto the ground with a pitter-patter. After a while, she finally returned to her senses and began to raise her ladle to chase Gumeng out. Shameless! How dare you disrespect this old lady? There was a roar of laughter. In the room full of laughter and hissing, Gumeng was chased by the widow from one end to the other, and as he laughed, he begged for mercy. I was sincere. Really, you're so pretty, so pretty. This old lady already knows. She's beautiful. You're pretty charming yourself, youngster, but you're just too shameless. Don't you know how to sneak into my bed at night? But no, you had to do it in front of so many people. You dengtazi I ate. This dengtazi made a ruckus so loud that it had caused chickens to fly and dogs to jump 9, yet he didn't forget to shamelessly yell out, yes, 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 I'll come fetch you tomorrow night. I can even stay back tonight for you as long as you bestow us with another 2 pounds 10 of beef. I beg of you, my fair lady. Ha, ever since setting up camp here, you've begged this old lady to put 3 rounds of beef on your tab. This is the 4th. Every single time, you've said you'll ask me out tomorrow night. You lying little demon, you. The widow shouted, slamming her fist on the table, and with a groan, a single crack split open on the wooden surface. The army riffraff rolled on the floor with laughter, though in the end, after all was said and done, Gumeng still used his dashing looks and an empty promise of tomorrow to coax the widow into bringing his men another 2 pounds of stewed beef. General Gu, you sure are great at the art of deception. Well, of course I am, Gumeng bragged, constantly swaying back and forth. I have been among the fields of 10,000 flowers, my conquests known throughout the lands 11. With such a commander, it was no surprise that at that time, a youngster made a brave remark, never mind that we're called the Wangba Army, even if they called us the Jiba 12 Army to challenge General Gu, I would still enlist. The friend seated next to him turned away in disdain, replying, dear me, all those holy books you read were all in vain. How uncouth. Then how would you refine it? Rather than saying Jiba, why not say Jibia 13, thus meaning cease the battle in order to repair weapons? The youngster was wowed, then said enthusiastically, what a great name, I like it. No way. I was just horsing around. Who would really like a name like Jiba? Wouldn't it be too humiliating to say it? If you don't believe me, then I dare you to try it out. If you called a dog by this, even he would be anxious. The youngster chuckled, there's nothing too bizarre in this world. Just because it doesn't exist now doesn't mean it won't in the future. If even our Grand Master can be called a Wangba, I'm sure it'd be completely reasonable to give some other thing the name Jiba. It was fortunate this discussion wasn't heard by Gumeng, because who knew if he would slap the table and holler praise at this idea, rename himself to Jiba Army General-in-Chief Gumeng, then hook his arms around all his officers and soldiers, dragging them to suffer a calamity together. The war was so grim, only a little madman like Gumeng would strive to be original, enthusiastically joking about the fires of war. He not only held in his hand the troop title of Wangba Army, but even personally set off to draft their banners, cutting the jade green flag into a brand new tortoise 14 shape, even giving it a vividly realistic little tail. He casted a little magical curse on the banner, making this tortoise roar out, Wangba, Wangba, formidable and mighty, your aspirations touch the rainbows, your power shakes this very earth. It could be said to be extremely embarrassing. The first time he placed this flag out on the battlefield, they were ridiculed to death by the enemy's general. In the end, not even half a day passed before the enemy's 100,000-strong army of cultivators were chased by the Wangba army until they cried for their mothers and fathers. After this battle, Gumeng fought in many campaigns, both large and small, and always came back victorious. This directly led to those years where he was appointed general-in-chief. The moment those nations opposed to Changhua herd turtles, the color of their faces would change, and the sight that those enemy cultivators wanted to see, the least was probably a little turtle flag raised at mast amidst the smoky battlefield, and General Gu galloping towards them on horseback, clearing his throat and introducing himself seriously. Good day, brothers. I am Gumeng, General-in-Chief of the Wangba Army, and I've come especially to ask for some tactical advice from my dear brothers. It was already shameful that they couldn't defeat this young cultivator. What was even more disgraceful was that would still have to return home and report to their emperor while sniveling, oh no, your subordinates were truly too incompetent. We were powerless against the Wangba army. It was an absolute nightmare. To the officers and soldiers of Changhua, even though Gu Meng was mischievous and whimsical, he was full of charisma. At that time, there were many who revered him, to the point where some who would believe in Gu Meng's ridiculous theory that crappy names bring good life, taking it as gospel 15, and there were many children born then who had the misfortune of being given crappy names by their parents. The trend was once like this: Chu Zhenshuing, Zhu Tiju, Dong Dantong. Therefore, the first thing Moshi did after taking over the Wangba army was to rename this cursed army. He never allowed for his personal military record to be Moshi, General-in-Chief of the Wangba army. Absolutely not. And so the Wangba army was renamed to the Northern Frontier Army. The troops were reassigned to Moshi, and that dark humor that was as unyielding as smoke and bloodshed, just like Gu Meng's legendary reputation, had its curtains closed to a disappointing end. And those little turtles that screamed, shouted, and roared out Wangba, Wangba, formidable and mighty, were just like an incredulous joke heard within a Mirage 17, never to be seen again on the boundless battlefield. Once again, everything became very solemn. There were no flowers, no honey, no one who would even try to remember the most insignificant name, no one to take the officers out to play around, and no one who would trade everything apart from their inner robes in exchange for rice wine. The war returned to an absolute cold-blooded grimness. The winter was here to stay. Although nowadays, the majority of those at the Northern Frontier Army hated Gu Meng's guts, it was probably for this reason that when the topic of him came up, their reactions were not quite the same as the common folk. This was especially so for those who used to went to war and back together with General Gu, the veterans of the Wangba army. Every time they read out Gu Meng's name, their eyes would somewhat glaze over dimly. This was especially so for those who used to went to war and back together with General Gu, the veterans of the Wangba army. Every time they read out Gu Meng's name, their eyes would somewhat glaze over dimly. I really wouldn't have imagined that he would come to this kind of end. Wang Shujun is a well-known tyrant, and with his majesty passing Gu Meng to him to deal with, I'm afraid everything bodes ill for him with no positive signs. I'm sure he'll die without his corpse intact. A fiercely ambitious person will not necessarily be hated, but traitors are destined to be punished by all. It's only when those veterans of the former Wangba army get together, where they would chatter endlessly about things that have nothing to do with hate. As the conversation winded down, the enthusiasm of some of the elders began to wane, and they sighed. He was such a great man. If it wasn't for what had happened that year, he wouldn't have. Shh, lower down your voice. To dare mention such an old story, do you not want to live? That old veteran mumbled an oops before coming back to his senses, and realizing what he had almost just said, the drunken stars in his eyes immediately scattered, and he couldn't help but quiver. The soldier next to him continued to remind him, nowadays we're working under General Mo, and the one General Mo hates the most is Gu Meng. It's not like you don't know what his temper is like. If he really were to hear you, we'll both be screwed 18. Yes, what you said is right. Look at me. The moment I have a drink, I get all confused. The soldiers sitting around the fire stove didn't speak another word, silently staring at that ball of flame, all of them with something on their mind. After a long while, someone finally let out a breath with great difficulty and said, "But I guess, people will change. All that we can say is that this is now General Gu's fate. How many years has it been already? Why are you still calling him General Gu?" Oh, whoops, yes, Gu Meng, Gu Meng. The night scene at the frontier fortress was silent, and the bonfire crackled, spitting out sparks in a gold brighter than the stars. That tipsy veteran laid down on the ground, and using his arms as a pillow under his head, he gazed towards the night sky and began to count the stars 19, the Z-Way star 20 sparkling brightly. He swallowed hard, then muttered under his breath, so that no one but him would hear, to be honest, back when I enlisted, it was to follow Gu Meng. I even had a drink with him while we sat around a bonfire, and he didn't have a single air of arrogance at all. At that time, I'd look at him, laugh, and think, if there was one day I could die in battle for him, then that could be considered a meaningful way to die. Who knew that in the end, he would unexpectedly face this kind of destiny? After the birds were shot down, the boughs were put away. After exhausting their use of Gu Meng, the enemy country once again sent him back to Changhua Empire as a gift to symbolize peace. This person had finally gone through the ups and downs of life, viewed a beautiful romantic scene, and one misplaced chess piece 22 made him a traitor. But there was no room for regrets 23, and no way to return. So what would you say is being trapped in one's own devices 24? What do you mean by the fact that persisting in evil only brings your own demise? Returning back to the main topic, although his fate was tragic, he could only blame himself for it, and for him to fall into such a thankless position on both sides was great news for the people. For a moment, almost all of the people within Chonghua's borders would raise their heads in hopes of catching a glimpse of Gu Meng's outcome. Beheading, 1,000 cuts, boiling alive, hacked into minced meat, dragged apart by 5 horse carts. Even a naive little girl who had barely learnt to speak would know to roll up her soft little tongue and vaguely keep up with the adults saying, "We shouldn't wet Jiweo of dis shameless pwig aged." Therefore, Gu Meng, General Gu, the former heroic commander of the Changhua Empire, Moshi's sworn enemy, the legendary man once praised as the beast of the altar, that youth brimming with heroic spirit, who had once represented warmth and hope. He finally lived up to his expectations and became a Schwamwispwig aged. End chapter. Excitement boiled over one. The lid was blown off the pot and refers to a situation that's out of control, exactly the same meaning as the English idiom boiled over. Wangba army too means bastard army, but Wangba also literally translates to tortoise. No skin on his face. 3 means shameless. Deng to Z4, pervert. Jiba 5 sounds like a slang for dick. Ba 6 can be interpreted as cockblock. We shouldn't wet Jiweo of dis shameless pwig head 7. Baby talk.